and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. I'm Joanna Hernandez. Here's what we're looking at. An effort in City Council aims to scale back protections for undocumented immigrants in Chicago. Meanwhile, a church in Pilsen moves its Spanish services online amid fears of President-elect Trump's deportation plan. And advocates for domestic violence victims celebrate a new bill that requires police to remove guns after orders of protections are granted. And now to some of today's top stories. Family, colleagues, and friends said their final goodbyes to the 39th president today. Jimmy Carter's funeral took place at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., where several speakers honored his accomplishments, including President Joe Biden, who delivered the eulogy. The ceremony concluded 6 days of remembrance for Carter, who passed away on December 29th at the age of 100. Carter's grandsons also spoke at today's service, highlighting their grandfather's political efforts against discrimination and his humanitarian work.
For us, he'll be in the kitchen making pancakes, or in his wood shop finishing a cradle for a great-grandchild, standing in a trout stream with Mom Carter, or for me, just walking those Georgia fields and forests where he's from.
Carter will be buried in his hometown of Plains, Georgia, next to his wife, Rosalind Carter. In Gaza, health officials are reporting today that over 46,000 Palestinians have been killed since the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war, with women and children accounting for more than half of the fatalities. The ministry also says more than 100,000 individuals have been injured. Despite international mediation, efforts to reach a ceasefire continue to be stalled. New conditions are now eligible for medical marijuana in Illinois. It's the first time the state has added to the list since 2019. The Illinois Department of Public Health says patients who have been diagnosed with endometriosis, ovarian cyst, uterine fibroids, and female orgasmic disorder can now register under the state's program. That brings the total of qualifying conditions to 56. Recreational marijuana is also legal in Illinois for adults. However, residents that qualify for medical use are able to get it at a lower tax. It also allows people to grow the plant at home. And drivers on the Kennedy Expressway can expect some relief soon. The Illinois Department of Transportation announces the reversible express lanes will reopen next week, following more than 10 months of construction on the Kennedy. But to safely remove the barricades and apply new pavement markings, there will be 3 overnight lane closures starting today through Saturday. So be prepared to check out our website for the schedule of closures. Up next, efforts from inside City Hall to cut back some protections for the city's undocumented immigrants. Heather Sharon explains right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors.
The Chicago City Council is set to consider scaling back protections for undocumented immigrants. That's at the request of 2 Alderpeople who have long opposed the city's status as a self-proclaimed sanctuary city. The showdown will come less than a week before President-elect Donald Trump takes office. He has promised to immediately launch the largest deportation operation in American history. Our Heather Sharon joins us now with more on the latest. Thank you, Heather, for joining us. I want to start off. Can you please remind us what it means that Chicago is a sanctuary city?
So for more than 40 years, Chicago leaders have protected immigrants in Chicago regardless of their citizenship status from deportation, and in many cases have prevented city officials like police officers from working with immigration agents looking to deport them or otherwise have them face legal consequences for their status.
And now, how would the measure authored by Alderman Raymond Lopez and Alderwoman Silvana Tavares change the city's welcoming city ordinance?
So right now, city officials are prohibited in all cases from cooperating with federal immigration agencies. If this measure passes on Wednesday, Chicago police officers would be allowed to help immigration agents deport some immigrants in limited cases when they've only been arrested arrested and charged with certain offenses, gang-related offenses, drug-related offenses, and prostitution-related offenses, or crimes involving minors. Now, that would be a big change, and it could mean a significant change for how the city interacts with the federal government.
Why would you say they want to make this change now?
Well, of course, we know President-elect Donald Trump is about to take office. He has vowed, as you said, to operate the largest mass deportation in American history. His so-called border czar, Tom Homan, has vowed to start that effort in Chicago, and Alderman Lopez has said that if Chicago makes this change, perhaps the Trump administration will spare Chicago and look elsewhere to start the big effort.
Interesting. Now, Mayor Brandon Johnson has said Chicago police officers will not assist federal agents as part of this mass deportation plan. Where does he stand on this proposal?
So he's urging members of the city council to vote against it on Wednesday. He said that it will add to the over-policing of black and brown Chicagoans on the south and the west side. He says it's also likely to violate the constitutional rights of immigrants, since they could be deported after just being arrested and not convicted of crimes.
What's next, Heather?
Well, this big showdown is going to happen Wednesday. It's not clear whether there is a majority of the city council that would vote to approve this. This measure has been out there since the fall of 2023, hasn't even gotten a hearing, much less a vote. But it's another indication that immigration is going to remain a hot-button issue well into 2025 in Chicago.
Well, thank you for that update.
Thanks, Jonna.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. Domestic violence deaths in Illinois rose by 110% in 2023. 68% of those deaths involved firearms, including the fatal shooting of Karina Gonzalez and her 15-year-old daughter, Daniela Alvarez, in July 2023 in Little Village. She took out an order of protection against her husband weeks before he shot and killed them, according to prosecutors. Now there's a recently passed bill in Illinois named in her honor. It's intended to protect domestic violence survivors by providing a process that requires police to remove guns after orders of protections are granted. Joining us to talk about this is Maria Lea Negron, Director of Policy Advocacy and Research for the network, advocating against domestic violence, and Lauren Gutierrez, Managing Attorney at the Legal Aid Society of Metropolitan Family Services. Thank you both for being here. Now I want to start with you, Maria Lea. This bill has been in the works for more than a year. Is this a victory for domestic violence victims, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the passage of this bill really sends a strong signal to survivors and victims of domestic violence that the state of Illinois is taking their experience of violence seriously.
You know, what was your feeling when you finally realized that all that work that everyone has been putting in, multiple people, that this bill is getting passed?
Yeah, it was really emotional, to be honest with you. I think for a while, because we had first introduced this in January of 2023, we were a little nervous that it wasn't going to go through, right? It had passed, a version of it had passed out of the House of Representatives in 2023, and then we were able to get it over the finish line now. So it's been a long time coming.
Now, we also want to mention that we also invited a number of critics of the bill, including Republican state lawmakers and gun right advocates, but they declined our invitation. I want to proceed with you. What would you say the previous legislation failed to address?
I think that you know, over the course of the time from introduction and the passage of the version from 2023 to the version that we have today was that we were just able to have more conversations with law enforcement, with state's attorneys, and we were really able to address kind of some of their concerns of how this would play out day to day. We wanted the strongest version of the bill to pass to make sure that it is going to work as it's intended to work. So I think it just gave us the opportunity to kind of have those conversations, those hard conversations. We both ultimately had the same goal. I think it was just a matter of getting there.
And Lauren, I want to go back. What is is the process for survivors to obtain an order of protection, for those who don't know? Take us through that process.
Yes, so it's a court process. Typically, a person will go to the courthouse in Chicago at 555 West Harrison and ask to fill out a stack of paperwork. It's a long stack of paperwork, and it's a daunting process for survivors when they are seeking these orders of protection.
Going through this emotional toll, I can only imagine.
Absolutely, and there's very few resources at the courthouse for survivors, and no matter how hard organizations like Legal Aid Society or our partner organizations and advocates work, we will never be able to address the need of survivors when they are seeking this assistance.
And what risk are survivors facing when they go through the process of obtaining an order of protection?
Absolutely. So when a person leaves a relationship where there's domestic violence, that's the most dangerous time in that relationship. That's the time that the person who has been committing abuse feels that they have lost control over the survivor. So it's already a dangerous time. When they leave a situation, there could be a lot of other factors. They could have lost their housing, they could have lost their financial support, they could have children with them. So it's a really difficult time for survivors, and they need a lot of assistance at that point.
What is something that you say that many people don't know about that process afterwards, putting that order of protection? Can it be lonely? What does that look like for a survivor?
Absolutely. At that point, the survivor has probably left their house, or they have been forced to leave their house. They have left, whatever sort of stability that they had before. And going to court is a daunting process. And if you add the dynamics of domestic violence on top of that, it just adds so many more emotional layers to an already fraught court process.
Marilea, now the bill will require police to take guns from alleged abusers. Can you tell us more about the new regulations in the bill?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Lauren was saying, orders of protection are really intended to be very comprehensive. Domestic violence can impact a survivor in every area of their life, whether it be financial, housing, emotional, mental. And so orders of protection are intended to be one-stop shops, very comprehensive. So in that current order of protection process, you can request firearm relief. And what this bill was really fundamentally about was strengthening that existing protection in the law to make sure that survivors kind of know what the option is under the firearm relief section of an order of protection. Judges know kind of what the standard is for them to grant that relief, and law enforcement understand their role and kind of what the judge is directing them to do through that court process.
And why would you say you're so passionate about this bill being passed?
Yeah, I mean, domestic violence is a personal issue for me. Being a Latina, we know that 1 in 4 Latinas will experience intimate partner violence at some point in their life. And this is a really important bill. We see the impacts. It feels like every week we see a new headline of survivors that are being either shot and or killed at the hands of someone who says to love them and is experiencing firearm-involved domestic violence. So it's a really important bill. We're really proud of it. We're really thankful for our sponsors and all of the coalition it took to get this over the finish line.
And talking about that, Lauren, how is domestic violence discussed with marginalized communities, as she mentioned, especially for Latinos?
Absolutely. I think that when you are seeking assistance from the court, all the documents are in English. All of the judges are speaking English. So I think that there's a literal language barrier when trying to access these services and this assistance from court or law enforcement or any player that the person might be seeking assistance from.
And you talked about this happening so often that we look at headlines, and it's something that we constantly see. What are some of the challenges that you would say come with identifying and helping domestic situations?
Yeah, I think that folks historically have seen domestic violence as something that we don't talk about publicly. Issues in the home should stay in the home. Or, if you don't have bruises, or you don't have any visible marks, that's not enough. You're not experiencing domestic violence. And that's completely contrary. We know that some of the highest factors of lethality are really, when that person is stalking you or, is losing that power and control that we know is a fundamental dynamic of domestic violence. And so I think we really just have to do more to broaden the conversation and to do a lot of education about what is domestic violence. I think for a lot of people, it's not a word that's in their vocabulary, but it is unfortunately very common and pervasive in our communities.
Do you think the word, Lauren, domestic violence, that people maybe just kind of already used to that word because we see it so much in the headlines?
Yeah, and I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding sometimes of what domestic violence could be. I think that some people think that domestic violence is only getting hit or strangled, but it encompasses so many other tactics that people who are committing abuse might use: financial abuse or mental abuse or emotional abuse.
And Lauren, this bill received some pushback and concerns about challenges anticipated with seizing guns. What was your response to some of these concerns?
Absolutely. I think, as Marlea mentioned, that the advocates really worked with law enforcement to try to address some of those concerns, but I think at the end of the day, these challenges can be overcome. I think that when we're talking about saving people's lives, I think that it's worth working through those challenges to make sure that we can have the safety that these survivors deserve.
And what are your thoughts on the same question? Because according to the Illinois Coalition Against Domestic Violence, in 2023, 94 incidents of domestic violence led to 120 deaths, an increase from the 45 incidents of domestic violence that led to 57 deaths in 2022.
Yeah, I think, again, we had a lot of conversations with law enforcement who ultimately we want to make sure that this works for them because they're going to be the ones enforcing this, right? I think that this is a question about being proactive when we know that there's a high risk of lethality for the survivor and or their family, to make sure that those firearms are removed as quickly when there's that immediate urgency to remove them. And that's what this bill really is about, is in emergency cases where we know that there's a credible threat of violence to that person and their family, we need to remove the guns.
Did you also see that the police, that they were open to this change?
Yeah, I mean, at the end, with this final version of the bill, law enforcement was neutral. So they weren't in strong opposition, and we were really excited to see that happen.
And final question here, what accountability measures are in place to ensure the bill is carried out fully?
Yeah, I think that we have a very long and robust implementation process ahead of us. We know that as advocates that worked on this, we have half of this work was getting the bill across the finish line, right? But there's going to have to be a lot of time and energy, and the same passion is going to be there to make sure that we're monitoring, having conversations with law enforcement, with the state's attorney's office, and making sure that this really works the way that it's intended to work. And if it doesn't, we will certainly be back in Springfield.
Any final thoughts, Lauren?
No, I just want to thank you for bringing light to this situation and for giving us a platform to talk about these issues.
Well, thank you both for joining us and the work that you do.
Thank you.
And we're back with more right after this. As Inauguration Day approaches, President-elect Donald Trump's declaration to launch the largest deportation program in American history is spreading fear across immigrant communities around the country. In Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood, Lincoln United Methodist Church is already guarding against potential deportation raids by moving its in-person Spanish services to virtual services online. Joining us now via Zoom is Reverend Emma Lozano, a pastor of the Lincoln United Methodist Church and founder of the nonprofit organization Centro Sin Fronteras. Thank you, Reverend Lozano, for joining us. I want to start off. Your church has been, as I mentioned, holding its Spanish services online since Christmas Day. Can you tell us a bit about why you decided to make this change?
Well, the leadership of our church came together, and because we were a target during the last presidential term of Donald Trump, our church was visited and attacked and defaced by white supremacists. We are a sanctuary church where Elvira Arellano and Flor Crisostomo and Francisca Lino had stayed during a time when they were in deportation proceedings and stood there to make a statement that they did not want to get deported from their U.S. citizen children or their spouses. So we have already been a target. Two people have gone and done prison time that have gone to come to our church and threatened us and broke our door on one occasion and hurt one of our volunteers, one of our congregation members. So we just decided that the best thing that we could do was go virtual, like we did during the pandemic. We learned a lot during that time, that we could still be together, and even though we were apart, and we could still hold worship service together.
And Reverend, emotionally, you just talked about what it was like when receiving threats, and what was that like emotionally for the congregation and for yourself?
Well, I remember the day, and it never really leaves you. You have like what they call PTSD. I remember when a group of men wearing red hats, when I was leaving my house because I was going to a baptism that I was going to perform, and I had a gift in my hand. And when I saw the group, I quickly turned around and locked the door and came out because I didn't want them to come into the house where my grandchildren were and that. And then I faced them, and they were yelling and saying that I was for open borders, and they had a big camera. And I understand that this clip went viral on their media places, and I was upset about that. But I tried to have dialogue with them because I really believe that even though that seemed threatening to me and they were yelling at me and insulting me, that there might be some way that I could make them understand. We're just families. We're families. Our people are here working. We have U.S. citizen children. We're mixed status families, and we're not hurting anybody, and we're actually contributing to the culture, society, and the economy of this country. So that was what I was trying to tell them, and that I was a pastor, and as a Christian, as the Bible teaches me, I am open to all people,
And Reverend,
not just those that they consider citizens.
And Reverend, Donald Trump's border czar Tom Homan claims that mass deportations will begin here in Chicago. Does Chicago's status as a sanctuary city make it a target? I mean, especially as we know historically, churches have been sanctuaries or safe spaces for people.
Well, because there's a lot of reasons, I'm sure Donald Trump and his administration is targeting Chicago. One, the Illinois and Chicago didn't go to vote for him in his last election. We have an African American mayor that seems like that's also been a target of the party of Donald Trump. And so I think there's a lot of reasons behind there. And the name a sanctuary city, I believe that it becomes a point of discussion where before, what it really means is that you're welcome here. Immigrants are welcome here. And they've turned it into this other thing where, it almost makes you, like I said, a target, like we're a sanctuary church. So therefore people, that do not believe or like-minded thinking people like ourselves, that they can come here. And I think that that's what the reason why they're saying they're targeting Chicago and the sanctuary cities, because that's how they motivate their base of hate towards us.
And Reverend, again, you've experienced these threats. You experienced what it feels like. What is your biggest fear moving forward, especially, hearing about Trump's mass deportation plan starting here in Chicago?
I was at a Bible study where I was doing a Bible study for children, and a white supremacist came to the church and sat in on the Bible study. And they were children born here in this country, U.S. citizen children, but their first language is Spanish because that's what they speak at home. And so we were doing the Bible study in Spanish, and he demanded that I speak English because we're in America. And this was very scary for us. We made a report later. The police really didn't find him until he broke, I guess, the windows at a Jewish temple in downtown, and then he was arrested. And that was not the first time they came. They've been inside of our church taking pictures and confronting folks during the last, like I said.
So do you believe that this could get worse?
I really think that they would target my church. So we are not going to be sitting ducks. I have a responsibility to my congregation, the English congregation that is younger, black, brown, and white. They will continue their service, but my service that we're mixed status families will not, and we will be on virtually. And like I said, this is no different than the pandemic. Only thing, the medicine is not the vaccine. The medicine now is for our leadership, for our community, for our city to come together and say that we are going to resist this. This is going to divide families. This is going to cause, our economy, hurt our economy, hurt our communities, because we're talking about families that have been here and have roots here. And,
Thank you.
And they're
Reverend, I apologize. We're going to have to leave it. We're going to have to leave it at that. But thank you for joining us and telling us about your experiences. And that's our show for this Thursday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 7 for the Weekend Review. Now, from all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and healthy. Buenas noches.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, and proud sponsor of programming that offers advice and strategies to enhance the physical and mental well-being of fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.